This is Franklin Rye, and welcome back to Political Spirits, the podcast that remains devoted to the proposition that the left and the right should have a few drinks and talk. Even if things get a little heated at the end of the night, we should be able to split up the bar tab and be on our way. Compromise is not a requirement. We just need to talk. So what are we going to talk about this week? So let's talk about something that President Trump has said recently, which has produced some extreme adverse reactions on the left, especially from cable news networks, most notably CNN. Specifically, he has described the fake news media as the enemy of the people. Not surprisingly, spokespersons for media outlets and reporters for those outlets have uniformly rejected President Trump's language and described it as unacceptable. Is the fake news media actually the enemy of the people? Well, not really, I guess. Using the phrase enemy of the people is a bit over the top, of course. But then again, it's not exactly shocking that a politician would use over-the-top language. And it's certainly not shocking that President Trump would use over-the-top language. I would say that the news media plays a crucial role in any free society because they keep the citizenry informed about those in power. They speak truth to power. The question is whether the news media in our society today is actually speaking truth to power. Well, to some extent, yes. But they really are not fulfilling that obligation based on the way that much of the media currently operates. I've considered the news media to be biased, in favor of the left and against the right for decades. But there did seem to be somewhat of a limit on how far they would go. In my lifetime, those limits seem to have fallen by the wayside, starting with the 2000 presidential election between George W. Bush and Al Gore. The media seemed to be more aggressively taking the side of the Democrat, and that continued thereafter through each election of the George W. Bush presidency. But it was with the election of 2008 and the candidacy of Barack Obama that the media seemed to transition from a position of bias in favor of the left to actively campaigning for the Democrat candidate. Frankly, the fact that the media took it so easy on Barack Obama with regard to his association with the Reverend Jeremiah Wright allowed him to build up a series of wins in caucus states. That series of wins cemented his status as a legitimate contender for the Democrat nomination and competitor to Hillary Clinton. If the press had treated him as they likely would have, if he was a candidate from the right associated with the Reverend expressing extremist views from the right, just as Jeremiah Wright expressed them from the left, Barack Obama never would have built the momentum which allowed him to challenge and eventually beat Hillary Clinton for the Democrat nomination. This is where, in all fairness, I need to insert that if Hillary Clinton had simply taken Barack Obama and the caucus states seriously, then she could have prevented Barack Obama from gaining that momentum. In that respect, it was her fault. But my point is that if the media had played things straight and not lined up in Barack Obama's corner, then Hillary's mistake in not taking him and the caucus states seriously would not have been as fatal to her as it turned out to be. By the way, to extend this aside a bit further, isn't it interesting that not only did Hillary Clinton lose the 2008 Democrat primary campaign against Barack Obama because she didn't take him and the caucus states seriously in the early part of that campaign, but she also lost the 2016 general election, arguably because she ignored states where she was not extremely popular, such as Wisconsin, for example, and instead focused on states where it was clear she was going to win regardless. Looking at how she lost in 2008 and how she lost in 2016, there's an obvious similarity. She apparently likes events and locations where she will be the most adored and dislikes events and locations where she'll have to work the hardest to win the crowd over. Perhaps the most unkind way to put it is, maybe she's lazy. It's not as if we're all immune to that tendency. I remember in college I used to work out with weights, something I've unfortunately abandoned since then. But when I was working out, I used to spend far too much time working on my lower body. It was my upper body that most needed the workout. I would spend lots of time focusing on my legs because it was easier and I could lift more impressive amounts. thus putting on a better show and boosting my confidence. But the point of working out wasn't to put on a show in the gym and boost my ego. The point was to get in better shape by building muscle. Hillary Clinton's repeated visits to states she already had in the bag in 2016 were the equivalent of my leg workouts. They were more than needed and counterproductive because they were taking time away from what was needed. So what's the difference between me focusing on my legs for workouts instead of my upper body where I needed it, and Hillary Clinton focusing on big states in 2008 and ignoring the small state caucuses where she really needed to work, then in 2016 once again focusing on states where she was in good shape and ignoring the ones where she needed to bolster her popularity? Well, she may have prevented herself from attaining the most prestigious and powerful job on the planet. I prevented myself from looking good in a tank top. I think I made the lesser mistake. By the way, for anyone wondering whether Hillary Clinton showed a tendency at other points in her life to fail, perhaps based on, at least in part, on a lack of hard work or taking the easy way out, many people don't know that Hillary Clinton failed the D.C. bar exam. I'm not quite sure how you go to Yale Law School and graduate and then fail the D.C. bar. As Carl Bernstein noted in his Hillary Clinton biography, Woman in Charge, the D.C. bar exam was hardly one of the toughest in the nation. He did, however, note that it was much more difficult than the Arkansas exam, which Hillary did pass and which brought her back to Arkansas. So she may have lost the 2008 Democratic primary by taking it easy and focusing on the populous states and ignoring the early caucus states, thus reducing the amount of hard work she'd have to do. Then she lost the 2016 general election, perhaps because she ignored states where she was less popular, such as Wisconsin, thus reducing the amount of hard work she would have to do. It makes you wonder whether she failed the bar exam because she rested on her laurels as a Yale Law School graduate and put in less prep time, thus reducing the amount of hard work she'd have to do. Does kind of look like a pattern, doesn't it? Now, after that long aside, let's get back to the original subject, which is whether the news media is speaking truth to power. I think much of it is not. Much of it is completely devoted to bringing down or at least undermining the goals of President Trump and his administration. You might say that's speaking truth to power. But it really isn't. There's a fundamental difference between addressing misrepresentations by those in power, which should be directed at those in power no matter which party, and attacking the contentions of an administration because they disagree with your views. The latter is what is happening with much of the media, especially CNN. Frankly, I've never seen anything like it. I've lived through the Nixon administration, the Reagan administration, and the George W. Bush administration. And the level of opposition and antagonism of the press towards the Trump administration dwarfs the level seen towards those other Republican presidencies. It's not just the constant attacks by the news media on the Trump administration. Also, the fact is they virtually never address the successes of Trump's administration. Think for a moment of just how over the top the three legacy TV networks and CNN and MSNBC would have been if the economy during the Obama administration had taken off the way it has during the Trump administration, including the recent wage increases, the surge in manufacturing jobs, the reduction of the unemployment rate, and the even more dramatic reduction of the unemployment rate for Hispanics and blacks. It was best described as worshipful. I've never seen anything like it. No matter how many actions the administration took, which showed a lack of appreciation for the incredibly positive coverage they were receiving, such as holding only rare press conferences, employing such lengthy responses to questions that they were virtual filibusters, exhibiting an abysmal record on Freedom of Information Act responses, and using the Espionage Act to pursue investigative reporters, the press continued to treat him in a worshipful manner. Now contrast that with the most recent example of over-the-top criticism of the Trump administration by the press. Incredibly, President Trump, a man with a Jewish son-in-law, a Jewish daughter, and Jewish grandkids, is being depicted as an anti-Semite and/or complicit in or the cause of the horrific anti-Semitic attack on a synagogue in Pittsburgh. Never mind the fact that the killer was very clear about his dislike of Trump, noting that he didn't vote for him, had never owned, worn, or even touched a Make America Great Again hat. As opinion columnist James S. Robbins notes in his article in USA Today on October 29, 2018, quote, "Linking Trump to anti-Semitism is factually incorrect and morally wrong. You never heard it before he ran for office. He has a history of giving generously to Jewish charities, including the Anti-Defamation League, and he received the Jewish National Fund's Tree of Life Award." The author notes as well that Ivanka Trump is an observant, modern Orthodox Jew, and her husband, Jared Kushner, is a, quote, "trusted White House envoy and personal advisor," close quote. The author makes three more undeniable points: that President Trump has a long-term connection with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and unlike his Oval Office predecessors, he actually followed through on his promise to move the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. And finally, that the dog whistle claims of Trump opponents about his statements fall flat because, quote, "real extremists don't hide their biases. You don't need to use a secret decoder ring to understand the blatantly anti-Semitic message when Louis Farrakhan says Jews are termites," close quote, or when Farrakhan talks about Jews infecting the world. How far has the mainstream news media gone in their anti-Trump fervor when contending that President Trump is responsible for the synagogue massacre? Well, the Washington Post published an article by Julia Yaffe claiming that Trump bears a substantial responsibility for the killings. This is the same person who was fired by Politico for suggesting on Twitter that President Trump was having sex with his daughter. This is the same person who stated while on CNN that, quote, "this president has radicalized so many more people than ISIS ever did," close quote. Last week I talked about how it's a shame what happened to CNN. Perhaps I should talk about what a shame it is what's happened to the Washington Post. Does all of this make the news media the enemy of the people? Not really. But it does make the huge portion of the media that has become so overcome by anti-Trump fervor that it can legitimately be referred to as the fake news media, as an institution which no longer deserves our respect. It has fallen so far from fulfilling its mandate of keeping the public informed and speaking truth to power that its status should be more on par with that of a used car salesman. Certainly not a part of society which has traditionally been held in high repute. But keep in mind that while a talented but morally corrupt used car salesman might convince you to buy a lemon or pay too much for a clunker, a used car salesman will never convince you to vote for politicians who will do great damage to the country. Just as you should do your research on buying a car. As I've said in previous episodes, when it comes to the news media, the best thing you can do is get your news and opinion from multiple sources with different viewpoints and take it all with a grain of salt. Next topic. Which politicians are more likely to be corrupt, Republicans or Democrats? This is going to be a short but important topic. I spent a long time on the prior one, so let's run through this one quickly and then close with the third topic. You don't really encounter the question of whether Democrat politicians or Republican politicians are more likely to be corrupt in opinion pieces or public debates. You tend to instead encounter individual debates regarding specific politicians. I should also note that if you watch closely, you'll tend to notice that when politicians who've been accused of or engaged in misconduct are not identified in press articles as being either Democrat or Republican, more likely than not, the politician will turn out to be a Democrat. The likely reason why that happens is some journalists will try to prevent identifying the Democratic Party when it would paint the party in a negative light. In other words, those are instances of biases coming to the forefront. But my question is broader than that. My question is whether Democrats or Republicans are more likely to be corrupt. I don't have a study here to cite, but I may come forward with one in a later episode. I just want to raise an interesting point. That point is that I don't trust politicians from either party, but I actually believe that the likelihood of a politician engaging in corrupt activities is higher if the politician is a Democrat. Now bear with me on this. I'm not saying that Democrats are more likely to be corrupt than Republicans. I'm saying that I believe that Democrats are more likely to engage in corrupt activities while in office. Both parties' politicians could have exactly the same likelihood of having a corrupt nature, but I believe the Democrats are more likely to engage in such conduct in office because I suspect they believe they are less likely to be caught. Why would that be? Well, as we've talked about, the news media's responsibility is to speak truth to power. And as we've discussed in multiple episodes, the news media very definitely leans to the left. To the extent that members of the media are biased to the point that they either would fail to aggressively pursue a story regarding potential corruption among Democrat officials, or they would simply pursue corruption stories only as to Republican officials because of their bias, corruption among Democrats is less likely to be uncovered by the press, and Democrat officials are likely to sense that. Moreover, government employees are disproportionately likely to be Democrats. Why does that matter? Well, most government employees are public employee union members. Such unions typically lobby for left-wing or Democrat causes. Their contributions tend to be to the Democrats. Their members tend to be aware that it is Democrat politicians who tend to be pursuing the legislation which their union supports. And those union employees tend to be registered Democrats. Why does it matter? Well, one of the ways in which the corruption is uncovered is via disclosure by whistleblowers. If government employees tend to be Democrats, and to the extent employees alter their tendency to engage in whistleblowing conduct based on whether the politician involved supports their political views, then it's more likely that a Democrat would benefit from a government employee's refusal to engage in whistleblowing. Does this point argue for voting for Republicans rather than Democrats? Not really. What it actually points out is the problem with the distribution of Republicans and Democrats in society. Would it be better if more journalists were Republican? Yes, it would. Among other things, it would make it easier to get a view of news and opinion from multiple perspectives. Would it be a good thing if more government employees were Republicans? Probably, because it would discourage political bias in delivering services. Next topic. The obvious one, what's going to happen in the midterm election? It seems like this election has been coming forever. I've heard the term blue wave until I'm sick of it. Is that what's going to happen? Is there going to be a blue wave? Well, let's talk about what it means first. The generally accepted definition in the U.S. for a wave election involves major gains in the House and pickups in the Senate as well in the same election. Historically, in midterm elections, the party in the White House tends to lose seats. And as we've all heard, the average number of House seats lost is 30. Because the Democrats need a net gain of only 23 seats to win control of the House, if the historical average is attained, the Dems will gain control. Moreover, Gallup has noted that for presidents with job approval ratings below 50%, the average number of seats gained by the opposing party is 37. If you really want to get into the nitty-gritty details of a forecasting model used to project the results of the midterms, take a look at the website 538.com for their analysis. To say that it goes into great detail might be the understatement of the year. They actually evaluate 3 different models for projecting results, which are the Life model, the Classic model, and the Deluxe model. So what do they predict? They predict an 84.5% chance that the Democrats take back the House. Do I believe it? No. I'm not saying that the Dems won't take back the House, but I really can't buy that the chance that they will is 84.5%. I don't have three models. I just have what I've observed and my experience. But I do think the Democrats are somewhat more likely to take back the House than not. I put the chance somewhere around 55%. They can even take it back by a substantial margin. But then again, the Republicans can hold. Will I be shocked if the Republicans manage to hold the House? No. There'd be nothing shocking about the Republicans losing seats in the House, but not enough for the Democrats to take control. It's just that it's somewhat more likely that the Dems gain the 23 they need to take over. In the Senate, 538.com gives the Dems a 16% chance of taking control. I don't think the Dems will take control of the Senate. The more common projection for the result is that the Republicans will maintain their current level of 51 senators or perhaps gain one or two. I think that they have a good chance to gain 3, 4, or maybe even 5 seats. That wouldn't be a wave election, by the way. If the Republicans hold the Senate and lose the House, that's not a wave. Clearly, if the Republicans hold the Senate and hold the House, it's not a wave. And the Republicans would not gain seats in the House. They would in the Senate. So there isn't going to be a Republican wave either. If the Republicans hold the House, how will it happen? It will happen because the Democrats will have racked up larger wins than they need in blue precincts, while losing close races in purple precincts where they had a chance, as well as those red precincts where they purportedly ran strong candidates. As I noted before, such a result would almost be like a congressional version of what happened in the presidential election. What could have precipitated that? Well, some have speculated that the Kavanaugh hearings had a disproportionately positive effect for Democrats in precincts which are Democratic and a disproportionately negative effect for Democrats in battleground precincts. In other words, the Kavanaugh hearings may have been a catalyst for a Republican hold of the House. I have to admit that I don't have as good of a hold on what is going to happen in the election this time as I did in 2016. The level of animosity between the two sides is way beyond what it was then, and it's largely being driven by the left. As the party out of power, when you label your opposition to the party in power as the resistance, you've basically characterized the country as a territory occupied by an enemy of the country. When you repeatedly label your opponents in political battles as racist, misogynist, or homophobic, and their supporters as either too stupid to realize the candidates they support are racist, misogynist, or homophobic, or the supporters are themselves racist, misogynist, or homophobic, you can't really be surprised when many supporters of your opponents refuse to publicly acknowledge their positions. I've talked in prior episodes about how I encountered large numbers of people in the run-up to the 2016 election who very quietly said that they supported Donald Trump. Unfortunately, the labeling by the other side has reached a point that I suspect many of those same persons would not now acknowledge their support of President Trump, even if they in fact do support him and intend to vote for the Republican candidate on Tuesday because of that support. As a result, the kind of grassroots level setting that I engaged in 2016 may not work now. I'm not saying that there is a large number of such individuals out there. What I'm saying is we can't be sure to what extent there are people who are in fact staying silent. And as I've said before, in multiple episodes, that's a bad thing for the country. So we're going to go into an election on Tuesday. And it could be that the polls are significantly off because people are not speaking their minds. Well, I'll make an absolute commitment to you. Here at Political Spirits, we always speak our mind. I'll resume doing so next week, and will no doubt have comments on the results of the midterm elections. Please join me by listening to the podcast. Until then, be sure to tell your friends about Political Spirits. And follow me on Twitter at Franklin Rye. Like me on Facebook at Political Spirits. This is Franklin Rye. Thank you for listening.